Here. Well, after the long year wait, we finally had Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 1, and this will be my recap and review. Spoiler warning, if you haven't watched it yet, don't watch this video. And if you're not familiar with the way I do my recap and reviews, I'm going to do a scene by scene. If you don't want to watch that, there will be a timestamp link right in the beginning of the description, so you can skip right over to the discussion at the end. So let's get right into it. We start off in Frey country, down at the Twins. And I think it was a cold open, so it was before the actual opening credits. And I think that it was almost like an exclamation point on the end of season. Walter was dead at the end of the last season, and here he was standing and talking. And it was fine. I mean, I think we all kind of expected this would happen, and it was put together nicely. I mean, she killed off all the male Freys as far as we know, had them drink poison, and I kind of liked how she turned in the conversation, to leave one wolf alive and the sheep are never safe. After talking about the Red Wedding and what a bunch of clowns they were, basically. And at the end, she leaves his young wife with the words, "If anyone asks you what happened here, tell them the North remembers. Tell them that winter came for House Frey." After the opening credits, we see a cold wind blowing, and it looks brutally cold, I might add, and we see the White Walkers marching with a very large army of whites. We see they have giants in their ranks there. It seems odd to me, I don't think that they would have not burned 1-1, but this could have been 1-1, I guess. He was shot in the eye, and it looked like this guy was missing an eye, but I would be under the impression that knowing what Jon knows, he would have never just left 1-1 there to turn into a white. The interesting part of this was we found out Bran was watching them. And at first I was kind of confused, and I guess I still am a little bit confused, but I guess he must have been skin changing a raven. Like the way the scene looked, it almost gave you the idea that he could just close in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think that there was probably a raven flying there, and we saw it through to the gate at the wall, and we see that it's opening up. We saw this in the trailer, so we knew it was going to happen. Meera tells them who they are. Obviously, he's not, they don't carry IDs, and he has every reason to be suspicious. But Bran lays down that he knows that he was at the Fist of the First Men, that he was at Hardhome, and that he's seen the army of the dead, that he's seen the Night King, and this pretty much convinces him. I mean, Bran says that they're coming for all of us. Then we travel over to the Great Hall in Winterfell, and we see this. We've seen lots of images of this in the promotional material, so we finally see what's going on there. Jon's talking about dragonglass, that they need to collect a bunch of it. They need to make weapons. They need to arm everyone, including the women. Lyanna Mormont gets a chance to put her foot down right off the bat and says she doesn't need permission to defend the North, even though she is a girl and she's small. So she has not changed. That's a good thing. And we find out that the Free Folk are a part of this plan. The Wildlings will be manning the castles. Eastwatch by the Sea is the closest castle to where they last saw the Night King, which was at Hardhome. So Tormund jokes that they are the Night's Watch now, and in a way they kind of are, because there really aren't many of them left at Castle Black. So everybody seems okay with that. I'm okay with it. Talk about the Last Hearth, and they talk about Carhold. These were the two northern castles that were occupied by the Umbers and Karstarks, who betrayed the Starks and went on the side of Ramsay in the Battle of the Bastards, if you're not remembering. Lord Royce says that they should be destroyed. Sansa says they should be reoccupied with people who were loyal to Jon, and Jon starts off this season leaving himself open just as he did when he was the commander of the Night's Watch. He makes it very easy to go against him. He does things that look weak, and Sansa pretty rightly pointed out that those families committed treason and that they should just lose their castles as a result. I wondered how this was all going to play out, you know what I mean? Because they definitely been trying to hype this tension between the two. So I guess this is kind of good. I mean, I kind of like how this is. I mean, she has a good point. He has a good point. The kids from those families, Ned Umber and Alice Karstark, he has them bend the knee, pledge fealty, and, this is all in the backdrop of that North needs to band together speech that we saw in pieces in the trailers. But the sequence of faces here is kind of what, I mean, there's real foreshadowing in this, right? You see Jon is pleased. You see Sansa is sour. And then you see Littlefinger over on the side, and he's pleased that Sansa is sour. So, yeah, they're doing that in a pretty heavy-handed way. You know, when they're walking around Winterfell, they have a heart-to-heart. Sansa is reasonable. Jon is reasonable. It is tenuous a little bit, but they talk about Joffrey a little bit, about how didn't let anyone question his authority and so on and so forth. Sansa says that Jon is the farthest thing from Joffrey that she knows, and she also mentions the fact that her father and Robb lost their heads, so that Jon needs to be smarter than they were. So, again, it's all she could say. But anyways, we get a raven from Cersei. She says in no uncertain terms that he has to bend the knee or he will suffer the fate that all traitors do. North, that will be descending on Westeros now that winter's here, in his opinion, working. There's nothing between us and Cersei. So he points out that it almost sounds like that you admire her, and she mentions that she learned a great deal. From there, we go down to King's Landing, and we see Cersei, and she has a boss map. I mean, I don't care what anybody says about anything. This map is awesome. Anyways, Jaime comes in. She talks about this is theirs now. It's just for the taking. She notices he's not on board and happy, so she asks if he's mad. And then she says, "Are you afraid of me?" And I thought it was pretty... She says, "Our brother, the one you love, the one you set free, the one that killed our father and our firstborn son." Tyrion is now giving counsel to their enemy, Daenerys, which is definitely a concern, right? So she says that they have an armada, which they do. It was handed over to them from the Greyjoys and all the other boats that they pulled from Meereen there. She asks where it's going to land, and Jaime guesses correctly in saying that it would be Dragon. She says that Illyria Sand and her children are their enemies down there. Killed the rest of her family, basically. And in the north, we have Ned Stark's bastard with Sansa by his side. So they're clearly in a tough spot here, and Jaime, as a military commander, recognizes this. They talk about what they need. They need food. They can't have an army if they can't feed them. He kind of points out the logistical things that she might not have noticed, and she says she knows that this is a war for survival. Whoever loses dies, and whoever wins could start a dynasty that could last 1,000 years. He points out a very obvious thing, that who would the dynasty be for? I mean, their children are all dead. So what is it that they really have? And again, then we have tensions, but both sides are pretty reasonable in their arguments. So she sort of rolls back to them, it's just for us. But I don't know about you guys. I sort of had a feeling that she has something else in mind. And we can't ever forget about Cersei's motivations. She makes some really good points about why they need to take out Tyrion. But the show is, I think, true to the books in her motivations. And Cersei is obsessed with Maggie the Frog's prophecy. So I think really her biggest goal is to kill Tyrion. And it always has been in some way. Of course, she likes being the queen and all that stuff too. But we need to pay attention to where she goes and the kind of decisions she makes based on that information, I think. So he points out what happened to the Freys. That news has traveled there by this point. Says they need allies. And she says, "You think I listened to Father for 40 years and didn't hear anything?" From there, we see that the Iron Fleet is coming to King's Landing. And the silence is badass. I mean, it's described in a pretty good way in the books, but this thing is like a floating fortress that he has on the TV show. So that's pretty awesome. He has the new Iron Fleet with him. Jaime goes on a pretty good rant about the Greyjoys. I won't retell the whole thing, but I really enjoyed that. Basically, they're good at nothing. They can't do anything, so they have to go out and take things from people who can. All that stuff. And he said, "Why would you want them on your side?" And long story short, eventually she tells him that she wants their ships, and she offered Euron what he wants, which is a queen. So they go into the throne room to receive Euron. We saw this quite a bit in the promotional materials, although they kind of kept us in the dark about who she was talking to. But they have a pretty good back and forth. Jaime points out some problems that he has with the Greyjoys and with Euron himself. And they talk about, Euron is actually pretty articulate here, and he points out that they both have treasonous family members that they want to kill, and they're both fighting for the other side. They talk about the Greyjoy Rebellion for a period of time, and Euron talks about how he enjoyed it. And when Jaime points out the fact that, hey, we were killing your people, he points out that he's glad that they did take over the Iron Islands because that got him into exile, and if it wasn't for that, he would have never became the greatest captain of the 14 Seas. So there's really nothing in the Iron Islands except for rocks and bird shit and the Iron Fleet, and he has the Iron Fleet, right? So he also burns Jaime when he offers himself for marriage by saying, hey, I'm here with the ships you need, and I've got 2 good hands. She points out that he murdered his own brother, and he quickly retorts that you should try it. It feels wonderful. And I think he probably got on her good side there because she does want to do just that, right? So he tells her, hey, I know what's up. You need a gift, and I'm not gonna come back to King's Landing until I can bring you that. From there, we go to the Citadel, and we see Samwell is hard at work paying his dues. He is cleaning toilets. He's cleaning bedpans more correctly. He's putting away books. You can see he's having a hard time. And he keeps looking behind these gates because he wants to get in there and read about how to stop the White Walkers. We see him working with the Archmaester. I guess we can presume here that this is Abros because he's doing medical stuff, and it is Jim Broadbent, so that is most likely the case, and, it's sort of a mentor relationship. They have a really interesting conversation. Sam really wants access to that area, and the point of view of the Maester, or the Archmaester here, I should say, is quite interesting. He sees that Samwell's telling the truth, that he's actually seen the White Walkers, but he says, people always think everything's going to come to an end, and it doesn't, basically. Even the Long Night wasn't the end, basically, and he says every winter that's come has ended. So Samwell eventually gets the idea this guy's not going to help him. He's going to have to achieve what he came there to achieve by other means. And then we see him steal a key off a sleeping maester in the infirmary, I guess it is. And he goes inside the locked cage and steals some books, which we'll talk about later. We see Pod and Brienne sparring. He's getting better, but she still is one tough cookie, so it's not likely that he's going to beat her anytime soon. Tormund comes over and he kind of cheeses, and he seems to be laying it on heavy, which some people will really like. We see Sansa and Littlefinger watching from above. We finally find out what this conversation's about. And basically, it's what you would think. He asks her, she says, what do you want? He says, I want you to be happy and safe. She says she is safe. And then he says, how about happy? What is it that you don't have that you need? And then Brienne comes up and interrupts, and Littlefinger goes off, and Brienne puts out the question, why do we need that guy around here? And she says that, we need his men. That's how we won. And Sansa also points out the fact that she knows exactly what he wants. We see Arya off in the woods on a horse. She comes across some soldiers. The big Ed Sheeran cameo that we heard so much about happens here. He's singing around the campfire. And, we find out these guys are just regular guys, small town types, I guess you could say, that went off to fight. They offer her some food. It's really not that important. We find out that she says she is going south. She's going to King's Landing. I don't know if she'll ever actually do that, but it's sort of like a joking around, they have some wine and some food, and they ask her where she's going, and she says she's going to kill the queen, which everyone laughs at. I don't think that there was much suspicion on their part of who she was, but I can't imagine that she'll stay with them for very long either, just for that reason. Some people would be able to recognize her in the Riverlands and beyond because she spent quite a lot of time there before she went to Braavos. We then catch up with the Brotherhood Without Banners plus the Hound. The Hound was actually like a stand-up comedian in a way in this, and it came off okay. Like, he was funny, He calls Thoros out for his top knot, saying that he's bald, and a bunch of stuff like that. They come up on this abandoned house. It's cold. They need a place to stay. And we realize that this is the house that him and Arya stayed in when that guy offered them shelter. And then before they left, the Hound knocked him out or knocked him down and stole his money because he said they were going to die anyways. Well, it turns out they did die. And it's a strange, it was a long kind of exchange. He talks about Beric and why does the Lord of Light keep bringing you back? Because you're just uninteresting. So he's showing some interest in this, but he's also very anti-Lord of Light at the same time. Thoros lights a fire, tells him to come look in the flames. He doesn't want to do that because he hates flame. He says that, lucky him, he ended up with a bunch of fire worshippers, but then he eventually does look into the fire. At first he says he only sees logs burning, and then he starts rambling off that he sees a wall of ice where the wall meets the sea. He sees the dead are marching, thousands of them. So he appears to have a vision in the flames. We don't see it as viewers, but unless it's some elaborate scheme on his part, that he was saying what he saw. So we see him bury the dead outside. He felt bad because it was his fault, like I said earlier. And, this is kind of an interesting callback to the books here where he was the grave digger, or he still is the grave digger as far as we know. So I think that's a little nod there. But yeah, I guess what we take away from this scene overall is that the Hound is with the Brotherhood Without Banners, and he may be borderline religious. He may be following R'hllor before this is all said and done. So we find out that one of the books that Sam took was The Legends of the Long Night, which Gilly has. We see Gilly and baby Sam, which is nice. He's completely worn out from his daily duties, but still trying to read up at night. They flip through the book, and he realizes that there is a ton of dragon glass underneath Dragonstone. He calls it a mountain of it, in fact. And then he decides that he needs to tell Jon this. So I'm guessing that he will send this information in a note with a raven, and that will probably get the wheels turning in Jon's head that he needs to go there. We see our old friend Jorah. We saw this in the first trailer, and I thought that was Jorah, and it is the case. He is getting worse. His grayscale looks pretty bad now. It stayed the same for quite a while, but it's definitely pretty bad at this point. I'm not sure if the show is following the same thing, but, generally speaking, they don't cure grayscale. They just it's sort of like a leper community where he's at, if it's the same as what I've read before, they just keep them together and feed them and whatever, but nothing ever comes of it. He asks about Dany, and that turns out to be the transition into her arrival at Dragonstone. So we see her come in. Dragonstone looks amazing. The dragons seem to like it. It's pretty, with the music playing in the background and everything. Even though everyone knew this was going to happen, and we saw pretty much most of these scenes in the promotional material, it was still pretty awesome. And they did kind of hide those giant heads of the dragons at the gates. We never saw any of that stuff whenever Stannis was in Dragonstone, so it was still pretty impressive. We see her pull Stannis' banner down. We see her check out the throne room. We see her find the map table. And then we realize that there have been no words spoken up until she says, "Shall we begin?" And the episode ends right there. So, all right, if you skipped the scene by scene, welcome to the video. So we'll jump into the discussion. I think it was a good episode overall. I think we knew most of what was going to happen, but there were a few surprises, which is good. We knew what was going to happen because they promoted the hell out of these scenes, and that's good that we got a lot of that out of the way. We knew Daenerys was going to arrive, but it was still an amazing scene, or sequence of scenes, I should say. And like I mentioned in the scene by scene, the music and the approach and her walking through, it was pulled off really well. No big surprises. All of her buddies are with her there, except the Greyjoys were noticeably absent. So we can imagine that they're off somewhere else doing something else. And it was impressive. Dragonstone looks amazing. They really emphasized all the Targaryen stuff there now that Stannis is gone, and they opened up a whole lot more. The throne room was awesome. We had seen that earlier, but still pretty good all the way around. The Jon stuff in the North is pretty predictable. He's going to do things the way he thinks they should be done, and his real concern is for the war that's coming. And Littlefinger is pretty predictable as well. He sees an opening, and he's going to exploit it for his own gains. That's what he's always done. I think Sansa is showing some maturity. She was definitely frustrated with Jon, but I think everyone probably was. And I think I think overall she's just playing her cards close to her chest. her allegiance is with her family, and that's going to play out like it's going to play out. The comedy was kind of good. Like it was a serious episode, but there were definitely some funny parts. Most of them came from the Hound. And then there was also some sad moments. I mean, he realized that he caused the death of those people, and he tried to do the right thing, which was to give them a proper burial at the end in the snow and in the cold. What I'm most excited about, even though I knew it was going to happen, is the Bran stuff. I mean, Bran is full on watching the army of the dead from a distance, and he's just gone through the wall. So that's just spectacular. I mean, we've been waiting for that, or I've been waiting for that forever, and it's great to see him develop to the point where he is coming full circle and is ready to come and be a useful part of the War for the Dawn. Dolorous Edd is always good to see him, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there in the next episode. From the trailers, we know he's headed to Winterfell, but maybe he'll be there for a bit first. The King's Landing stuff was good as well. You can see that Cersei's been busy plotting and scheming, and even though Jaime's not totally on board, there's no way he's not going to step up and command this army and fight for his family. I thought it was interesting that Cersei turned Euron down whenever he talked about marriage. I didn't really anticipate that would happen, but it does make sense. I didn't really anticipate that Euron would show up here first without any gifts. And I would say that Euron is kind of completely different than what the book Euron is like. But I think it's workable in this context. Like, I'm one of those people, I love the books. Obviously, the books are 1,000 times better, but I don't really see the point in beating up the show for not being as good as the books. Like, I'm a fan of both. I look at them as two different things, so why beat up the show for doing what it's good at? Euron is a character I really love, but my anticipation is not that he's going to be like he is in the books. I mean, they just cut too much of him out for that to even be possible. And it's the same thing with Samwell. Like, what I've been waiting for the most in the books is to find out what goes on at the Citadel with Samwell and Marwyn the Mage and all that stuff. And it's really clear that we're not going anywhere near any of that stuff after this episode. But, you know, it's moving fast. You know, I read something on the way home because I was stuck in the rain, and they were saying, well, it wasn't so fast paced, but the stories are moving at a fast pace. Like, Sam could leave the Citadel in a couple days now that he has those books. So I think it is actually moving fast. And so far it's working, and hopefully that'll be the case going forward. Like I said, the Arya stuff wasn't a big surprise, but I'm sure that fans will really dig that she did that. And then it's interesting that she says she's going to King's Landing, because I don't think that'll be her ultimate goal, but we'll have to wait and see. So there's a lot to think about. Who's going to be next on her kill list? Is the Hound really going to find God, or the Lord of Light, or whatever you want to call him? What's Cersei's plans on feeding this army? What's going to happen going forward there? I mean, we know a lot of the stuff from spoilers, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to talk about this episode. So I'm planning on doing a couple more. I'll do a trailer breakdown, and then I'll do some additional videos. So let me know what you want to see. If you have questions, leave them there. Maybe I'll do a Q&A later this week. We'll have to see how things go. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video if you liked it. I'll be doing this all season. I did a bunch of Game of Thrones last year. You should check out if you haven't seen them yet. And follow me on my social media. There's links in the description on my channel. That's the easiest way to interact with me, especially on Twitter. So let's start out with some hype about this episode and see where things go. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.